Welcome to Penumbra. The conversation starts now. Good afternoon and welcome to Penumbra. I'm very excited to have a very special guest, Mr. Lash LeRoux. And just to introduce Lash a little bit, Lash is currently working as a special events caricature artist. He's an associate pastor with a Baptist church, and he's also a former WCW star. Lash, welcome to the podcast, and thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thank you, Will. It's a pleasure being a part of it, man, and being on with you. We've had some great conversations, you and I, since we've met each other, and I'm very interested in us being able to dig a little bit deeper and kind of tease these things out a bit more.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. That's what we're going to do today. And just to get things started, tell me a little bit about where you grew up and your background, what sports you played, how you got onto the road to where you ended up.
Absolutely, man. It's a very interesting story, and the older I get, the more I've grown to appreciate it, and I'm thankful that I've come through the things that I've come through. I grew up extremely poor, Will, here in Alabama, a little town called Oxford, Alabama, and it's about halfway between Atlanta and Birmingham on Interstate 20. So we would be west of Atlanta, east of Birmingham, south of Huntsville, Alabama, if you're looking at your geography there on the map. So you're looking at us up around about the 2 o'clock position there if you're looking at the state of Alabama. And I grew up in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. A lot of people don't realize the Appalachian Mountains sort of start here in Northeast Alabama. And I grew up extremely poor, extremely country, extremely rural. My mom had 5 kids and she dropped out of school in the 8th grade. And so we lived in houses where we didn't have running water or electricity. We just couldn't afford to do better than that. And I moved to this Oxford area when I was about 9 years old and began going to church with a family that really took me under their wing and did everything but adopt me, and I started working when I was 9 years old. And at that age is when I really realized, hey, I got this thing called labor. And if I'm willing to hustle a little bit and put some effort out there, people will give me money for it. I don't necessarily have to be going hungry all the time or living in a house with no running water or electricity. So I started working for this family and got very, very, very close to them, worked with them and for them all through high school, went to church with them, learned a lot from them. They really discipled me in my faith, and I grew in my faith a lot in those years. I always had a great attitude despite what my circumstances were, just because I think God had still given me this gift of life. And this family that I worked for, they did residential construction. They built a lot of the houses and starter homes in the neighborhood for small families in this area. And then they also had clothing stores and some other small businesses. So I would build houses for them in the summertime, work on the construction sites a lot during the week when I got out of school. And then I would also work for them in their clothing stores on the weekend. They had a men's clothing store and a women's clothing store. And that was pretty much my life throughout junior high, middle school, and then high school. I played sports. I wrestled and I played football. All those things poured into me, again, this meritocracy, where I realized not only do I have this work ethic that can really bode well for me and I can dig myself out of a hole just with straight hustle, but I also had recognized there's a meritocracy to life. Like football, like wrestling, like making a team, man. If you go out there and you work harder than the guy next to you, oftentimes, even if he's more talented and even if people like him more, or if he has more advantages or comes from a better family, if you outwork him, then oftentimes you can surpass them. And that was sort of my mentality. And because of that, I was blessed to be a part of the state championship wrestling team and won state as a amateur wrestler. And then our football team my junior year went undefeated and won a 5A state championship here in Alabama. So I really got a lesson young and early on that, man, hard work does pay off, and whatever you can dream you can really do if you put enough into it. And I'm giving you a very condensed version of that, but man, these things really highlighted and drove me throughout my high school years. And when I was about 15, my mom had a boyfriend that owned the house that we rented out. And when I was around 12 years old, he abused her and beat her, and I was too young to understand what was going on at 12 years old because my mom did a very good job of hiding those things. But back then, technology is not what it was now, and a lot of taking a police report for an incident like that was taking pictures of the injuries with a Polaroid camera. So that became part of the report as well. And when I was about 15, I had found that report, and it just so happened about that same time he tried to do the same thing to her again, and I wasn't too young to do anything about her. And I took a baseball bat to the guy. And that caused my family to kind of scatter even more. We already was not well off. and had difficulty paying our bills. And at that point, it was a matter of us going with whatever family members would take us in. And my family is an extremely close family. We love each other very well. And none of these things affected us from a relationship standpoint, but it did cause us to be extremely independent and separated from one another. And because I was doing so well in high school, and because I was kind of taking care of myself by then anyway, and providing for myself financially, and because I had a job, and because I didn't want to leave my football team and all the things in my community sort of really rallied behind me. That gentleman that I worked for, yeah, I call him Pops. I called him Pops up until he passed away. He was like a father to me, the closest thing to a father ever had. And he said, "Look, you need a place to sleep. You need a paycheck. You need a company vehicle." So I began doing security in their clothing store. And so my junior and senior year of high school literally was I would go up at midnight. I would lock myself in the clothing store. I would clock in as security, sleep behind the cash register in a sleeping bag, get up at 5 a.m., lock the place back up, go down the hill to the high school. And because I played sports, I could go into the athletic department, take a shower there, go to school. After school, have football practice, went home with a buddy that I played football with. His family would feed me. They would let me hang out, do homework, shower until I went back up at midnight, clocked back in again to be security. And that was my junior, senior year of high school. And surviving all of that and facing all that adversity brought me to the outside and the other side after graduation and going, man, life is adversity for everybody. Everybody go through difficult times. Mine's just been front loaded. And if this is what the real world looks like and this is what life looks like, even if I suck at this thing called adulting, I'm never going to be so poor that I'm homeless, sleeping behind a cash register in a sleeping bag. So I shot for the moon, man. And that's when I followed that passion and that dream of get going towards professional wrestling. And even everything else that I've done in my life since then has been driven by this idea that, hey, I'm not afraid to fall to the very bottom because I've proven to myself already that God will bless me enough that I can drag myself out of it.
Wow. Okay. You just gave me quite a bit to chew on right there, buddy. But
Yeah,
that was quite an introduction to the backstory of Lash LeRoux. And I just want to follow up with a few questions that you touched on. First of all, what was your mother's name?
Donna Joe.
Donna Joe. That's a great name. And where do you fall in the birth order with the rest of your siblings?
Yeah, so I'm the second kid, and I'm the middle child from the standpoint of my mom had 3 boys pretty close together, and we all 3 had different fathers. So I have an older brother that's about 2 years older than me. I have a younger brother, I can't call him my little brother because he's bigger than I am, and he's about 2 years younger than I am, and then I was right there in the middle, and then when I was about 8 years old, my mom married a guy, and they had twins together. So I have 2 twin sisters that are a bit younger than I am, but all of us are close together. Our experiences in our childhood were slightly different because by the time the girls came along and those twin girls were born, there was a little bit more stability. They still were not well off by any means, and they would have been lower middle class, but they had a little bit more stability in their home life than we had. And their father, to his credit, was the greatest thing that ever happened to my mom. Nobody has loved Donna Joe more than Charlie Cresswell loved Donna Joe. But us 3 boys growing up, man, we fought, we loved one another, we were close, we still are close now. My older brother was a sheriff's deputy for a while, my younger brother was in the Navy for 22 years, and so I was kind of in the middle playing the hero while they were out being heroes.
All right. Okay. That's good. And then what weight class did you wrestle at in high school?
Yeah, so I started about 152 when I was in the 8th and ninth grade, and then by the time I graduated, I was 189.
Okay, all right, wrestling with the big boys. And then,
Yeah.
after you graduated from high school, did you go on to college, or did you go right into pursuing professional wrestling? Tell me a little bit about that.
I certainly will, and I certainly didn't mean to just plow through all that backstory, but there was so much that happened in a very short amount of time, and sometimes it's difficult in a short form conversation to kinda get all those things in that are so important, but I can't overstate how integral that time in my life was because while I'm going through all that adversity that we talked about, and that was kind of a timeline of what my lifestyle was at the time, but obviously there was a lot of details that are happening in the midst of all of that. And so while I'm fighting for a state championship in both wrestling and in football and working really, really hard as a student athlete, and while I'm sleeping on a clothing store floor at night, so I got a place to stay, and while I'm going to school and trying to get through and just graduate with everybody else in my graduating class and just survive during all that time, there was a pivotal moment there where when I turned 16, I went home with that buddy that I mentioned that I played played football with after football practice, as was our common practice. And we got to his house, and his mom, who was, if you've ever known one of those team mothers in school that was kind of the mother to the entire team, she was one of those kind of women. And she had a heart for all the kids and all the students. And she was just that kind of woman. And when I got to her house and she found out it was my 16th birthday, she lost her mind. She goes, "You can't turn 16 and not have a 16-year-old birthday party, right?" And so she immediately threw together the quickest thing that she possibly could for a birthday party and invited a few people, invited my older brother who was able to come, some people from the neighborhood, some football player teammates. And then there was a girl that was a friend of the family's whose great aunt that was more like a grandmother to her lived right across the street from this family, and it was a tight knit neighborhood, so they all kind of knew each other for 30 plus years. These people had known and grown up along each other. But anyway, this young lady gets invited to my party, and she was homeschooled, so she didn't really have any friends her age. And so that's when I met my wife, who would be my wife, on my 16th birthday. And
Oh,
there's a
wow.
lot of other strange coincidences and weird life stuff that happened during that time too. Again, all these things feed into my faith. I believe God opens these doors, and we either take advantage of them or we don't. And it doesn't mean that we're wrong if we don't go through one particular option or we take a different door, but it does mean that God is laying these things out, I believe, and then we can choose to follow them or not. And so during the course of this time that we're talking about, and I don't mean to sound like I'm all over the place, but I promise these instances dovetail together very well. And while I'm working up there at the clothing store on the weekend, if we would have a slow day in the men's store, they'd send me over to the women's store and they would just ask me to greet people as they're coming in. And so there was one particular client of that women's store that had four daughters, and she would come in, and she was a very wealthy, well-to-do person in town. I didn't know her that well at the time, but she was the kind of person that could show up very eccentric. There'd be 15 minutes left before closing time, and she could drop 8 grand in the late 90s. Now we're talking too on clothes for her daughters before you even close the door, right? And she noticed me and took particular interest in me, and she asked Pops about me, and he shared some of the stuff we've already laid out and talked about. And she goes, "What a nice young man, and how polite he is. I want to help him out, and I want to just let him charge $100 worth of clothes each month to my account, just so he looks nice and presentable where he goes, and that could be my way of trying to help him out." And so fast forward, my 16th birthday, I meet this little girl, and not long after I asked her out, first person I ever really dated. Within a year, we were engaged, and we were engaged for about 4 years. And I only waited to marry her because I didn't want to marry her till I knew I could take care of her financially due to how I had grown up. And once I knew WCW was going to sign me to a contract, then that's when we got married. But what I found out about 10 months into our marriage, or into our dating life, we just met each other. Her mom came to us one night after a date and said, "Look, I need to talk to you guys because I don't want you to find out on your own and think that I was trying to manipulate something behind the scenes." But she was the woman who a year before had come in and wanted to donate $100 worth of clothes, to this young kid every month just so I would look good. And by then she was helping me out so much, and I had become such a part of their life. There was no need for that anonymity anymore. And so those were these type of elements in my life that just continued to just grow together and come together in one big coincidence, if you call it that. I don't believe in those things. I think it's the hand of God in our lives. And so to answer your question about college, right after I graduated, they had a finished basement apartment that they allowed me to move into. I started college with my fiance at the time, and I was maybe a semester into college and trying really hard, thinking I'm going to follow this professional route and I want to make a great career for myself. And in my mind, I'm thinking, all right, I got two choices if I want to not be poor. I'm either going to be a doctor or I'm going to be a lawyer. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go towards trying to be a doctor. And about a semester in, I decided to take some time off to see if I could sell cartoons to magazines because I always loved to draw. And I'm very autodidactic in meaning that, I study things that I'm interested in to try to educate myself. And I found out, like, if you want to be a magazine cartoonist or a newspaper cartoonist, we didn't need a degree for that. It was just a matter of whether or not they liked your work. So I took a semester off with the blessing of my future mother-in-law and some other people people around me and said, I'm going to try to sell some of my artwork. And during that time, I started watching wrestling again. Wrestling was exploding in the late 90s. WCW was actually a bigger company at the time than WWF. They both had Monday night shows. You had WCW Monday Nitro, you had WWF Raw, and they would go head to head in the same time slot each Monday night. And WCW had all the guys I grew up with: Roddy Piper, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, the Macho Man. And so that got my attention and I gravitated towards that. And I had not been watching that and becoming a fan again for maybe 6 weeks before I saw a commercial for the WCW Power Plant, which was a training school in Atlanta, and they had open tryouts. Went to that, which is a whole nother story, but then that kind of led me on to where I've ended up.
Well, listen, that's fantastic. And what you said about your mother-in-law, how she kind of revealed herself after the fact of that lady who had been so nice and kind to give you $100 credit at the store so you could dress nice and look presentable. That kind of gave me the thought of the story Great Expectation, where the boy in that story, Finn, has a unknown benefactor who's silent hand in his life, guiding him and pushing him forward and just wants the best for him, but also doesn't want him to know that he or she's the person in the background guiding him so he can continue to propel himself forward under his own weight. That just made me think of that, kind of gave me the chills when you were telling me that story. And then to dovetail into what you were mentioning about how you're coming into WCW at the prime time, that's when I was watching a lot of wrestling. My college roommate and I, my buddy Adam, we used to watch both of those shows every night on Monday. I would watch about 4 hours of wrestling every Monday night. And we bounced back and forth between the programs because the storylines in each particular program was so good at the time. Goldberg was there, The Rock was there, Hulk Hogan and all the greats were coming from WWE. They were back to WCW. There was all sorts of crossovers. It was just a great time for wrestling. The storylines were fantastic and it was really engaging. And that was really, in my opinion, as a fan, kind of the wrestling had gone into doldrums for a while before that started, right? And that time period really kick-started and reinvigorated wrestling to what it was and what it became today. It was almost extinct at that moment. It was on life support. But with the talent like The Rock, Goldberg, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and of course you were there at that same time, that ensemble cast, that propelled wrestling into the next generation and brought along, new fans, old fans, reinvigorated the old fans like us, but also propelled it into its next chapter and what it is to this day.
You're absolutely right, Will. And for all your listeners out there that may be wrestling fans, to give you some perspective on what you're saying and how true it is, I was a child of the 80s. So exactly what you're talking about is true. I grew up when Hulkamania was first running wild, and WrestleMania was just a thought, then became WrestleMania 1. And then Piper being the biggest bad guy in the world. And then also the Macho Man Randy Savage and snapping into a Slim Jim. And then you had the Four Horsemen down in the South here in the NWA and WCW before it became what it was. And so I grew up in that landscape and fell into love with wrestling with those larger than life characters. And then those larger than life characters were crossing over for the first time into the mainstream. And anybody who was anybody at that time that was a big star was able to go on to Hollywood and go on to greener pastures, which Hogan made a slew of movies there. I'm not saying they're great. I'm just saying he made some movies and had that crossover appeal. And so in the early 90s, what you're saying is true. All your big stars were gone and they were either semi-retired or just making more money in other media outlets. And then you had this young crop that was trying to come up, but wrestling was trying to find itself, and they weren't really sure whether they're going to be more reality-based or more cartoonish. And so there was this lull there where wrestling almost did die, like you're talking about. And it was the last bastions also of the territory system, which are the little local independent outlets before they found their footing again. And so what really saved wrestling was the combination of Ted Turner coming in, buying WCW and taking it national as a competition with the only other company at the time that was national, which was WF, later WWE, and then them hiring Hulk Hogan and Hulk Hogan becoming a bad guy for the first time ever, starting the NWO and that exploding and changing the landscape and the cultural dynamics. Then in that explosion from a business perspective for us in wrestling, the reason why it was such a golden era was all these legends were on the backside of their career, but they were still young enough that they were still involved. So that got the attention of the people that's of our age group and our generation generation that grew up loving them. Then you had this new crop of talent that was coming in that was tremendous and great guys. Then you had this national landscape and scene where everybody was loving the product that wrestling was producing, but then also the internet was in its infancy. So it had not yet exposed everything about wrestling. So you weren't quite sure. And similar to going to a magic show, how much of this is real and how much of it is sleight of hand, right? And so that was a sweet time to be a part of the wrestling business also because you're doing big business. You're on the road 300 days out of the year. You're in a different town every night, and people can't just go online and find out what the results are going to be before they have to.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and I'm a child of the '80s too. For my 8th birthday, I went to the USF Sundome here in Tampa and saw Hulk Hogan fight the Big Boss Man in a steel cage match. All the guys were there. It was one of
That's
the best
awesome.
experiences and memories of my life, and of course,
Yeah.
as you know, Tampa is a wrestling stronghold historically, and, we have a family friend whose father he used to own a big gym up here in Tampa where a lot of wrestlers would work out and pump iron and do all that stuff, and actually during the time, he was good friends with The Rock's father, and The Rock actually lived with them when he was 15 years old in
Oh,
their
awesome.
house, and there's some videos.
Yeah.
She had a brother who had special needs, and he worked out all the time, ended up being a Special Olympic power lifter, won a bunch of gold medals and stuff like that, but he and The Rock are still friends to this day, I believe, but I'm with you, man. I grew up watching Hulk Hogan, and if I could vote when I was 8 years old, I would have voted for him for president, hands down, every day of the week and twice on Sunday, and I know he teased a run for president for about 3 or 4 months there. I don't know if that was a gimmick or if that was real, but, when you were coming up and kind of the old guard was passing the torch, so to speak, keeping the organizations going. But these younger guys like yourself and the other high flyers and very acrobatic, athletic guys that were coming into the ring and doing things that you've never seen before. And it really started to transition from kind of the traditional big guys to the young, smaller guys. You were a cruiserweight when you were at WCW. And what those guys were doing in and outside the ring, above the ring, it just kind of opened your eyes. I've never seen stuff like that before.
Absolutely, and it gave me a great opportunity because I recognize the landscape of wrestling there too. Being a young guy coming in and being a smaller guy in comparison to some of these giants that were still holdovers from the '80s. I saw WCW, who was especially making an effort to have a cruiserweight division, and nobody has really been able to replicate it in the same way that WCW did. And but where they got a lot of their talent from, in order to get guys that were capable of doing those types of moves, is they brought in these luchadors from wrestling from Mexico, a lot of these masked wrestlers who could have these great matches. The only issue they were running into was their personalities didn't always come across on television and connect with the fans because so many of them couldn't even speak English outside of Ray and Juventud and just a couple of guys like that. Eddie Guerrero being another one that became a huge star in his own right. But I recognize that only one or two Americans that can even have matches with them, and the best that could go move for move with them was a guy by the name of Billy Kidman, and Billy became cruiserweight champion. And I thought, okay, if I could stand out and be different, if I'm an American wrestler and I can do all these same moves that they can do and have the same type of match that they're having. So I taught myself that luchador style, and that really gave me the opportunity to be on television, to make my Nitro debut, to make my pay-per-view debut, and then I came out with character on top of that, and it kind of exploded for me from there.
Tell me a little bit about the different characters and how they develop over time and transition from one character to the next. And sometimes they'll put a mask on a guy to like reset the character, then bring him back as a heel or a baby face or whatever. It's kind of a constant evolving, probing to see which character works and what gimmick works and all that kind of stuff. So tell me first, what was your character? How did you develop it? And did you have any other characters on top of that?
Yeah, so I wrestled as the Raging Cajun Lash LeRoux, and I'll be completely transparent with everybody and tell you the full story on all of it, and I don't have any qualms about exposing anything about myself, and I'm not trying to protect any characteristics or anything like that because I think it makes for an awesome story and also how much power we have in and of ourselves to write our own story. And for me, I kind of wrote my own story. I came over in WCW. I was like 18, 19 years old when I first signed with. I was the youngest guy they had under contract. They didn't even realize it because I grew up so quickly and had to mature at such a young age that I just kind of blended in with the older guys. And they took for granted that I was a guy in my young 20s or whatever else. And I really wasn't. But I had a lot of common sense because of all the things we've already talked about, Will, and how I had to grow up, right? And so I grew up my entire life. My full name is Jonathan Mark Lash LeRoux, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. I grew up most of my life, people either called me Mark or like my mom called me John Mark. Pops would call me Marcus. pretty often. But for the most part, I went by Mark. And you can still see now on YouTube, even a couple of my very first WCW matches, I go out as Mark LeRoux. And in wrestling, wrestling comes from the old days of carnivals and guys going around from town to town and taking on people in the audience and that sort of thing. And a lot of that carny blends over into wrestling. In fact, wrestling has its own jargon and its own vernacular that's referred to as carny in ways that we can communicate with one another in code words and in other languages that people don't understand. A lot of the younger wrestlers don't know that anymore now, but I was a carryover in between those. And one of the terms that's used, and it's really not a term of endearment at all, is the old carnival guys would refer to the people they're trying to con. There's a mark for my con. And so if you were at a carnival and you're trying to throw the rings on the ring toss of the bottles and it's slipping off, they've greased the skids there to make a little money off of you. They're trying to con you. You're a mark. And so they called wrestling fans marks because of that as well. And so I went to my very first show there, matter of fact, in Orlando Studios, and they would film the Saturday night shows there. And I walked up to Terry Taylor was one of the agents at the time, and he was kind of known for his smart aleck responses and his dry sense of humor and his sarcasm. And I walked up and wanted to introduce myself to him, and I said, "Mr. Taylor, I'm Mark LeRoux." He went, "Mark, I'm sure you are, kid," and just walked off without shaking my hand. And I go, "Okay, I know the name Mark probably is not gonna work too well in wrestling." So I immediately was trying to think, what am I do that's gonna be more catchy than that? Well, with my real last name being LeRoux, I've always been called Lash LeRoux as sort of kind of a throwaway nickname, and especially at the power plant at the training center, the guy that ran that was an old school guy that was much older, 60s or whatever, and he remembered the old cowboy Lash LeRoux, and so he would always call me Lash. And so he called me into his office one day before I ever signed a contract with WCW. I was just training at this time. And he goes, "Hey, kid, you think you're going to wrestle as Lash LeRoux?" And I go, "Well, I think I probably will. I mean, there's a lot of name recognition in it, and a lot of people recognize the name even if they don't remember the old cowboy." He goes, "I think that's smart. I think it's wise." He goes, "If I was you, now you don't have to take my advice, but if I were you, I wouldn't worry about copyrights or trademarks or anything else with the last name like LeRoux." He said, "I would go back to my hometown, just like a woman goes to the probate office when she gets married and changes her last name. Go and petition the court to add Lash to your name. Don't change who you are, just add it." And I thought, okay, so I've got a buddy, matter of fact, Pops, that I've told the story about. One of his sons, his youngest son, is a lawyer now in town, and he had just finished law school, and we were close, and he had hung his shingle out, and I went and saw him and kind of consulted with him. I was like maybe 18 at the time, just at legal age where I could do it, and shared all this with him. And he goes, I think it'll work. Let's try it." So we went, petitioned the court, and sure enough, added Lash to my name, and I've been Lash LeRoux ever since. So now the name's taken care of. I'm not a big enough star that anybody in WCW is pulling me aside and making big plans for me, right? So now that I've got the name Lash LeRoux, which is a little different, the next problem I ran into, Will, was they stuck a microphone in front of my face. And at this point, I'm 18 years old and had never been outside of Alabama. So I sound like I was 18 years old and I'd never been out of Alabama, and I would talk like this on the microphone. Whoa, kid, you can't talk like that on television. Southern's considered ignorant on TV. You got to drop the Southern accent. And I'm thinking, how in the world am I going to drop my Southern accent? And I tried and I tried and I tried, and it hit me one day. I go, you know what? There's guys in professional wrestling like the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, baby. And Dusty Rhodes had this bad lisp, and he just took that lisp and he overpronounced it and just made it part of his character, if you will. And it worked for him. And then you had guys like the Macho Man Randy Savage. Yeah, he worked on his voice and made it very iconic and different. Dig it. And I thought, okay, if those guys can do it, maybe I can do something with mine. And I grew up here in Alabama watching public television, and there was a guy that would come on Alabama public television that was a Cajun chef.
Yeah.
He go, "I guarantee, Will, sit yourself down right here. We're about to make a little chicken, a little wine for the chicken, a little wine for me. It'll be the best thing you'll put in your mouth, I guarantee." And so when I heard that, I go, you know what? I can't hide my Southern accent, but with a last name like LeRoux, I can cover it up with a Cajun accent. I became the Raging Cajun, Lash LeRoux. And that's what I would do, and I come out with a little laissez le bon temps roulé, we'll let the good times roll. So now I fixed that problem of having an accent, and I made it work for me, and they go, "Yeah, that's perfect. Southern is ignorant, but Cajun's a character. You got something there, kid." And even then, though, they're not, like, pushing my character, so The next thing they did is they looked at me and they go, "You look like that kid from the movie Rudy. You have such a baby face. You need to grow out some facial hair, grow your hair long." I started growing my hair long, and you can't tell now I've got this cap on, but my hair does nothing but just curl up. And so I had this big curly wig, which looked kind of different, you know? And so I just grew my hair out and it just got curlier and curlier and curlier. Everybody in the 90s had a goatee. So facial hair wise, I didn't want to go with the goatee. I was like 18. And, you know, if you're an 18-year-old man and you try to grow a full beard, it gets in all patchy. So that didn't really work for me. I'm a big Elvis fan. So I grew out these big Elvis pork chop sideburns. And one day I'm looking in the mirror and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I can shave those things into the shape of an L, and that's another dimension of my gimmick. I got an L on each side of my face. That's my initials for Lash LeRoux. And so I did that without asking anybody's permission. And then when they'd book me on TV, I'd come out, and one week I'd throw out Mardi Gras beads. And then the next week I'd come out and I'd had Raging on one side of my tights, Cajun on the other, because I'm thinking to myself, they haven't told me I can be the Raging Cajun Lash LeRoux. But right now, doing the color commentating on the play-by-play is Tony Schiavone, Bobby Heenan, and Dusty Rhodes. If I go out there with Raging Cajun on my tights, they're going to call me the Raging Cajun while they're calling my match. And so I just made it its own thing. And I say all that stuff to say this, Will, in the broader picture of just life in general, so much of what we're able to do in life is making things so before they become even formalized, right? Start doing the job that you want to have before you're given the job.
Absolutely. If you can visualize it, you can be it. It's all about positive visualization and putting things out into the universe. And those may not instantaneously occur, but you're giving the universe an opportunity to bring those things back to you if you just believe in them. And nobody knows how the mind works. Nobody knows how the universe or God works. So why not give it a shot? Just put it out there and maybe it'll come to fruition. I tell my daughter that all the time. She's a competitive golfer. And I say, before you go out there and just swing the club one time, and full disclosure, I don't play golf at all. I said, you need to visualize every shot you're going to play tomorrow in that tournament, and visualize every shot going perfect, and visualize some shots not going perfect, and then visualize what you're going to do after that, because you're going to get put in bad spots. And it's not about what you do if you get in a bad spot, it's what you do after you get in that bad spot. Every golfer in the world hits the ball in the water. The best guys in the world, they hit in the water, they hit in the woods. It's what they do after that shot that matters. And that's kind of what you're talking about. Not everybody starts off on third base with a pocket full of money. It's about what you do and how you put one foot in front of the other and get there. Like we talked about before we started, life doesn't hand you an instruction manual about how to live this life. Everybody's out there doing their best to try to provide for themselves and their family. And everybody's got their own stories. So thank you for sharing that. That was an amazing creation of a character. You watch these wrestlers on TV, and I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, I assume that there's a team of people in the back, hair and makeup, and they're going to make you this guy and you're going to wear these tights and whatever. But it sounds like it's almost an organic thing. Is that true for everybody, or is that just true for your path?
Mostly just true for my path, because you also had more of an opportunity to do what I did when I was coming in, but also what it's true for are for the people that's not chosen. And here's what I mean by that is oftentimes, and especially now in WWE, they're at such a high level, they're picking and choosing their athletes at this point, and they're signing guys. And oftentimes they want to sit down with a team and they do want to come up with something creative, and they're not going to get you on TV until they know something's polished and they have it right. But at the same time, if you haven't been chosen for that and you're stuck kind of on your own coming up with stuff, there's ways that you can get people's attention. And guess what? If it works and it makes money, they're going to let you utilize that, right? And if nothing else, you're going to get their attention. So you should always be making that effort, I think, when they're not doing anything with you. And I think that's a part of life, right? Is I don't never know what's next, but I do know the things that I can work on, and I can do these things to prepare for what's next. The life that I've been able to live, and the journey that life has taken me in general, as a matter of fact, that I share with groups all the time when I speak to especially young people. I'll point out to them, you know, oftentimes they're asked the number one question they're always asked, these young people, is what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'm not saying that that's a bad question. That's a great question, because you're never too young to start preparing for those things. And I get that. And I understand the wisdom behind it. And I understand parents that want to start molding their kids early on to give them every advantage that they can. But here's what I also understand, Will, because of my life and because of my unique experiences, you never know what opportunity is going to open up. You don't know if it's professional wrestling when you never even thought that was on your bingo card, or if it's caricature that becomes a successful business. And for me now, full disclosure, I make as much off of my caricature now as I did when I wrestled on TV, and I'm on the road as much, traveling and doing as many events as I did when I was on television. So it's become that lucrative for me. And what has allowed me to be successful in all these things, I believe, is what you really need to do is ask yourself not what do I want to be when I grow up, but who do I want to be when I grow up? Because you have a certain segment of tools that you can put into a toolbox, right? You have these unique things like your work ethic and your character and how you relate to other people. And am I somebody that shows up early and stays late? Am I dependable? Do people want to be around me? Do people want to give me an opportunity? Am I relatable? Am I coachable? Am I teachable? And you put all these tools in a toolbox, and then one day a door opens up and an opportunity is there, and you look, you say, well, what kind of tools do I have in my toolbox that may allow me to be successful at this? And then you can apply those things. And I think that's where dreams come from. And I also say that because I have yet to find the job that I think a reasonably intelligent person that has some competency can't be trained to do. I've lived enough life now to know that I've met some boneheaded doctors, for instance. Now, I understand that I would have to really apply myself and be passionate enough to make it through medical school and get that education if I wanted to be a surgeon. But I am convinced I could be one if I wanted to apply myself to that at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the points you bring up, it's about, that who do you want to be when you grow up? And it's about not only working on the craft that you're going to ultimately end up doing, but also working on who you are as a person, your interpersonal skills, your people skills, your ability to connect, hard work. And a lot of times we see that in life where Tiger Woods, for example, he was the best at what he did as a golfer, probably the best that ever did it. Nobody's going to argue with that. Some people might, but it's pretty demonstrable that that's the fact. But also, while he was working to be the best at that one particular skill set, he was not apparently working on those other things that you have to do to be a good person in life. But a lot of people that are so focused on being the best at one particular thing, oftentimes, if you pull back and look at their life outside of what they're doing as the best, they're sometimes not good at that. And there's a lot of chaos that surrounds them because they're not focused on those other things. They're focused on being the best at one thing, which is exceptional and very difficult to do. But at the same time, you can't put all your eggs in one basket and focus on one skill set because something's going to have to be put on the back burner. And sometimes that's relationships, friend, faith, whatever. Dale Earnhardt's another example of that. Fabulous race car driver. Outside of his racing, there's a lot of things going on in his life that weren't positive. And that's not a knock on him. That's just when you are solely focused on being the best at one particular thing, other things are going to fall by the wayside. And that's just because we're human beings and we can only do so much with our lives. So that's a great point about having that balance and focusing on who you want to be and being sure that when you become that person that you want to be, that you're a balanced human being that can interact with people in a positive way. Another question I have, and we're not going to talk about wrestling the whole time because you got a lot of other things going on,
Yeah.
but I am, full disclosure, acutely interested in your wrestling career. And I've never had an opportunity to speak with somebody so candidly about this. But when you walked into the WCW locker room for the first time and you're around, what was
Intimidating,
that like?
but also it goes back to what you were talking about, balance in life and balancing your perspective at least as well, because you wanna walk into experiences like that and you say to yourself, "Okay, who am I really surrounding myself with?" Well, I'm myself with the best at this particular vocation, at this particular job, but what you're also recognizing on a daily basis as you're interacting with them, and once that being starstruck kinda wears off, you go, "Hey, they're a regular person just like I'm a person." They're hyper successful and very good at what they do, but man, it's daunting at first and intimidating at first, but very quickly you understand that it's the same that holds true in life, right? If I walk in and I'm polite and I'm respectful to people, more often than not, people are going to treat me in a respectful and polite way. And I've always been sort of humble that way and believed in treating the way that I'm treated. And I found out very in wrestling, especially, you hear some of the fun stories and the horror stories, and the jokes about people being hazed or young guys, especially a certain way, are being teased or being ribbed, and all the practical jokes that happen. And those things happen. Don't get me wrong. But what my unique personal experience was this: I was so respectful to all the older guys that kind of came before me, and also tried to humble myself. Nobody ever hated me or treated me that way at all. While at the same time, I saw other guys a little bit older that get treated that way because they'd walk in with a little bit of a superstar chip on their shoulder that they've made it to the big show and they've made it to the big game and now they are somebody. And those guys would get humbled really quickly.
Yeah, my brother, he played football at the University of Florida back in the day when Spurrier was the coach. Spurrier's last season was his senior year, had a very good team. And when he was a freshman, similar kind of story, he was a very humble guy, felt like, he was a smaller guy, really kind of had an opportunity to play for the Gators, and he wanted to see if he could play for the best. He had opportunities at other schools, but he ended up having a very good career there. But the freshmen did get hazed. And there's a couple of guys that would come to the University of Florida, big blue chip, 5-star athlete recruits, and they're just going to walk in and just, kind of like I'm the king of the show kind of thing. And the older
Yep.
athletes, the veterans on the team are like, we're going to show this young buck, we're going to humble him real quick. And there were those guys that basically put a target on their own back because of how they behaved. And my brother, like, I think they shaved his head, made him sing a couple songs, a little bit of embarrassment type thing, but he ingratiated himself into the group pretty quickly and became a leader. But not to say that the other guys didn't, but they definitely had a target on their back.
So funny even to this day, and a couple that pop in my mind, immediately. We had one guy that wrestled for us, the Disco Inferno, and he was kind of known and really, really, really mouthy. Great guy, fun guy, a funny guy backstage and for the most part, everybody liked him, but he would run his mouth constantly, and his humor was real sarcastic, and sometimes he didn't know when to shut up or when to quit. And we had showed up to an event, man, and the Steiner brothers, so many of these stories too involved the Steiner brothers. They were kind of the bouncers of the locker. But the two Steiners had come in and they had just taken gaffer's tape, which if you're not used to production, it's basically just duct tape that they use in production. It happens to be black, and so you don't see it on TV. And that's correct, that's correct. They had put him in a chair from head to toe and just mummified him in this gaffer's tape, and we're walking in, we're going, "Oh my gosh, who is that?" And they're telling us who it is, and we're laughing so hard, and they're going, "If anybody lets him out, you're gonna get it twice as bad as he has," And so they made him sit like that, I guess, man, it was several hours because they didn't finally release him till, about a half an hour before the show started, and then we had another event that we did at the room we were staying in, and I wanna say this was, like, in West Virginia or something, and it had a drop ceiling in the locker room that had the ceiling tiles in it. And back then, all the wrestlers, kind of the rule had in professional wrestling was carry all your gear with you on the plane so that if your luggage don't make it to the next time, then at least have your wrestling gear and you can wrestle that night and you can work, right? So we all had these Toomey bags that were kind of a higher end Samsonite bag at the time that everybody would carry on the plane with them. Super expensive bags, but they were very dependable. And everybody had one. It was kind of a status symbol in wrestling at the time. And we'd keep our gear in there. And there's a Billy Kidman, who I mentioned earlier. At the time, character wrestled in a white wife beater shirt, wrestling in some blue jeans shorts. I guess not dissimilar to kind of what later on. But we got to the show, and the Steiners, for whatever reason, decided to Billy that night. They took his bag and they put it up in the ceiling tiles and hid it from him and would not tell him where he was. And he was getting madder and madder and starting to panic more and more the closer it was getting time for the show to start. And now we realize the show's going to start, and they're not going to tell them anything about this, right? And nobody else is giving it up either. So they sent a bunch of runners, grips from the production team to go to Walmart and just buy him some blue jean shorts and to get him through the rest of the tour. And he is so mad because he's lost his bag and everything else. And about 6 months later, we're on the other side of the country and we're like San Diego doing a show there. And we're sitting in catering, we're watching the news. And just as one of those human interest stories on CNN, they go, "Today, some construction workers found wrestler Billy Kidman's gear bag up in the lock." And we just lost it, man. So that's a long time for a practical joke. And 100%.
The Steiner brothers.
Here, quick story about them. The older brother, Robbie, his real name was Robbie Recksteiner. And because he had such a long German name like Recksteiner, some promoter pretty on said, "You know what? We're gonna make you just the old school with the headgear, and we're gonna call you Rick Steiner instead of expecting fans to be able to constantly say Racksteiner." So instead of Robbie Racksteiner, he became Rick Steiner. So when his younger brother graduated and they started tag teaming together, they called him Scott Steiner. And so Scott Steiner later on became Big Papa Pump, which was a whole different character in his own self and became a really big star with that. And in fact, just recently, they've got a son, I think it's Rick Stein that's wrestling in WWE, and that's Braun Breaker. and he was playing in college, went on, I think he got up by an NFL team, but really didn't pan out for him, and now he's in professional wrestling, doing really, really well for himself, and I just saw last week, unless I'm mistaken on this, Scott, Big Papa Pump, had a son that was playing, as a matter of fact, at Jack State University, which is right here in my hometown, the JSU Gamecocks. He played for them and just graduated last year, I think, and just got picked up by the New Orleans Saints, I believe.
That's
Yeah,
awesome. I remember Big Papa Pump. He was so muscular,
he
it
was
looked uncomfortable,
unbelievable,
coming through the television.
unbelievable.
That guy was stacked and jacked, to be fair.
Right, right. Quick story on that one too is that's pretty interesting is he had this move at the time that was similar like the old school iron sheet camel clutch, where he would sit on your back and just stretch you, and they called it the Steiner recliner. And I was always really, really, really flexible for my size from amateur wrestling and everything else. And I had a match with him, and he put that thing on me, and I really arched my back, and I arched my back so much to try to make him look so good. He almost stumbled backwards, but he caught himself, and so on television, it looked great, almost like he's folding me in half. And one of our sponsors, I don't know if you remember this company in the 90s or not, was Surge Soda. It was another like caffeinated drink. It was called Surge. Correct, correct. Well, Surge had a deal with us, and they decided to do a line of soda can, top superstars finishers on it. And so the picture of him putting me in the Steiner recliner for about a year and a half was on these Surge cans every time I went to a gas station. So I'd see myself getting folded in half by Scott Steiner. It's the whiplash, of course. You know, that marketing creative mind that I always trying to have. One of the things I took a lot of pride in, even though I didn't get a lot of credit for it, invented a lot of moves. Was really big on trying to come up with stuff I'd never seen before. And I invented a move where I would pick a guy up like a fireman's carry, I would hook his head, and I would jump in the air, and as I jumped in the air and I spun him forward, if you can imagine that in your mind, then I would sit down, and as I sat down, I just body slammed him down in front of me. So I went from a fireman's carry to jumping up in the air, spinning him and slamming him in front of me, and I called it the whiplash, and that became my finishing move. And then the other move that I had that was a signature move that happened completely by accident, and this tells you how important it is entertaining in wrestling. I called the Bourbon Blues, and here's what that was. Will, this is a great story. So a big star at the time and a heavyweight champion, in fact, was Diamond Dallas Page, DDP. WCW. And Dallas was always working on his craft. He worked really, really, really would come to wrestling in school and on a daily basis try to learn new stuff and is always trying to stay trying to innovate, do things differently. And we're in the ring one day, and I'm not doing anything but trying to impress him and make him laugh while we're in the ring, while we're hanging out together. And I had noticed that guys like The Rock started doing the people's elbow. You know, as ridiculous as that was, he was over the top with all the theatrics and then just drop elbow is all it was. And then there was another guy, Scotty Too Hottie in WWF, that would do the worm. And when he got through doing the worm, he'd pop up and then he'd drop an elbow on somebody, right? And then there was another guy that's a good
Oh,
friend of
yeah.
mine, Road Dogg, part of DX in WWE, would do the shimmy shake where he's shaking and doing his legs and doing his shoulders, and then he just drops a knee on somebody. So I looked at Dallas one day and I said, this is what I'm going to start doing, like those guys are doing. I'm going to put the guy three times, and so I'm just throwing three jabs at somebody, and I'm acting this out as I'm telling him about it. So I'm going to jab the guy three times, dance like James Brown, and I started dancing like James Brown, and then I'm going to do the splits, and I did the splits, and then when I pop up from the splits, I'm going to clothesline the guy and go, ooh wee. And so I'm acting this out as I'm telling Dallas, and all I'm thinking is I'm just trying to laugh and entertain him while we're in the ring. So jab, 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 dance like James Brown, spin around, splits, pop up, ooh wee, clothesline, boom. Dallas looks at me, his eyes got as big as a saucer, and goes, "Bro, you've got to do that in every match." And I said, "You're kidding." He goes, "No, I mean it." It became one of the most popular things I ever did when I wrestled. Brad Armstrong, who is gonna be a lesser known name when a big hardcore wrestling fan. Brad was one of those kinda guys that was a gen wrestler, and he was a wrestler's wrestler. Now, if you talk to any professional wrestler, they'll tell you he's one of the best wrestlers to ever lace up a pair of boots. Most fans, especially now, wouldn't know him because he never got that big superstar push. As far as guys that did get that superstar push, Scott Hall was very helpful, a lot of advice. Kevin Nash was. Anderson from our generation, the old original Four Horsemen. Retirement years became what we called a road agent backstage, which a guy that would help you put together matches and tell you, kind of how that match is going to go and what needs to happen in it, what the psychology and storytelling should be, and what you're trying to get across. And Arn was really good about critiquing you too when you came back afterwards and laid out for you. He was very, very, very helpful.
Let me ask you this. While you mentioned Arn Anderson working backstage to kind of help you put together the match, and a
Uh-huh.
lot of people use this pejorative towards wrestling. They say it's fake and all that kind of stuff. And my rebuttal to that is the outcome may be predetermined in some way, but what those guys are doing in the ring is certainly real. They're certainly inflicting pain and damage on each other and themselves. But also, as far as selling the match and doing the storytelling, what you just mentioned, how much of it is improvised? And they always talk about who's a better wrestler. And are those are the guys that are just better at improvising the story as they go along and working with their partner, whoever's in the ring?
What it means to be a wrestler is being able to put all those elements together. And opportunity now for that as you did before. For my generation, it was very important for you to be what we call a good worker. In fact, we call it working when you're having a match like that. And when you're fighting somebody for real, that's a shoot. When you're putting on a show and it's entertainment, that's a work. And you're trying to keep that as safe as you possibly can, which doesn't always happen. But and really where you get hurt is not the guy pulling this punch or not pulling this punch. Like a lot, if I go out there and have a match and I'm trying to make him look good and he goes to throw me in the wall, I'm going to take that as hard as I possibly can to make him look good. But to break it down for you, Will, in a way that I think people can appreciate more and see everything that goes into being a quote unquote good wrestler or a good worker is here's what you have to realize that you take into consideration. If you're doing a show like Monday Night Raw or Monday Night Nitro, and when an age like Arn Anderson comes to you and they say to you, okay, you got a 10-minute match. You and Will are going to wrestle for 10 minutes. We want Will to win with a splash off the top rope. Outside of that, hey, you kids go out there, just give us a hell of a match. Well, that gives us a lot of to lay that thing out ourselves. And how we lay it out is going to depend on whether you're the good guy or I'm the good guy, or you're the bad guy and I'm the bad guy. And then we're going to work backwards, really, because we know how we want the finish to go, but then what's going to lead up to that finish? And then once we figure out what's going to lead up to that finish, well, the only way that we're going to get any kind of cues off that is if we put these things together and we go, okay, well, my comeback that I was coming up with and how I would really run up and get my stuff in and do these moves and look like I'm about to beat you, and then and then maybe you're the bad guy and you did something dirty to cut me off, and then you trip me up, boom, I hit my face, you go up to the top, you hit me with that splash, and there's that 1, 2, 3 we're looking for. We say it may take us about a minute and 45 seconds for us to accomplish all. So I'm gonna walk up to the ref and I'm gonna say, ref, let me know when there's about a minute and 45 seconds left. That's what I want for my go home. And the only person that has any kind of communication to the back at that point when you get in the ring, especially on television, is the referee. And so the referee does have an earpiece, and the producers back there are going to say, 2 minutes left. You got a minute 45. Well, that referee hears a minute 45. He's going to lean down while he's checking on you to make sure choking you and go, hey, go home. And so that's kind of our cue to try to finish this thing up. But here's the difficulty in all that. Whatever we talk about in the back might change. Let's say you're the bad guy, but we're gonna have a match in Tampa. And maybe we show up in Tampa, and here's that Lash LeRoux that thinks he's gonna come in here because he's a professional wrestler and a professional athlete, and he's gonna wipe the floor with Will. We're supposed to boo Will, but we're gonna cheer for him because he's our hometown boy. Well, now the dynamic has changed when I've heard the live crowd. So I better be able to improv and change my match as we're going and saying, hey, Will, what we talked about is not going to work. So we're going to change that dance while we're dancing in the ring. So not only do I have to keep the time correctly in my mind, think of all of this. When I through that curtain and I see the red light goes on, 4 different cameras I need to be aware of where they're at all times. So I'm playing to the cameras and everything that I'm doing while I'm trying to remember all the stuff we talked about doing, while I'm listening to the crowd, because by the way, there's a live crowd there and I need to see what they're reacting to and play to the crowd as well, while not neglecting you, while not neglecting the referee, while not neglecting those cameras. And I need to hit all those moves that we're going to hit without hurting you, without hurting myself. I need to make sure I don't miss any that or get the order of them rearranged up. I need to make sure you and I our timing is down right and our keep down right. And I need to pace myself through all that. And oh, by the way, when it's all said and done, they told us we have 10 minutes and this is live TV on a Monday night. So that 10 minutes cannot be 9 minutes and 30 seconds because if we do, now our whole show is going short. And they're going to be mad when we get back there because they got to make up that time somewhere. Or let's say they told us we have 10 minutes and something happened in our match. We wound up going 10 minutes and 45 seconds. The next segment out after us is The Rock cutting a promo and doing an interview. I'm gonna now walk through the curtain and go, "Hey, Rocky, sorry about that, man. We went about 45 minutes long, so I guess you need to cut your interview about 4 seconds." You think he's gonna be happy about that? No. So, all these things play into every single match that you have level, man, and you're trying to do all these things while being safe for yourself and safe for your opponent. So you're an actor, stuntman, you're a professional athlete, you're an improv artist, and you're trying to do it all at once.
That's amazing. And I guess I never really thought about the timing of the matches. Obviously, there's the main event, and the feature match is going to be the longest match, however long it's going to be. And then there's the lead up matches. And I always understood that the outcome was pseudo determined, so to speak, but also there's those elements that you just mentioned as far as like what the crowd wants. You want to put on the best show possible. So if you come in, Lash LeRoux, from Alabama, Louisiana, wherever, and you whip the hometown guy, well, now you're taking away an opportunity to put on a really
Yeah.
good show and give the fans what they want to see. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day, right? Let me ask you this. Our friend Brian Wilson shared this with me. I guess you told him this story that when you were coming up, you had some interactions with Randy Macho Man Savage. And by the way, your impersonation you did earlier in our show, I think that's
Yeah.
one of the most spot on impersonations I've ever heard. And the Dusty Rhodes was really good too. I've been watching
Yeah.
casually the Hulk Hogan documentary on Netflix. I told you before we got started, and just last night I watched a clip of Dusty Rhodes. I hadn't seen a clip of him in the longest time. That was spot on to start with. And another funny side story about that: my father was a country guy, as a veterinarian. He's since passed away, but he had curly hair, kind of like Dusty Rhodes. And one of my good friends in town, his father used to call my dad the American Dream when they were growing up because he kind of had that curly hair or whatever. It made me laugh when you started doing that impersonation. But Brian Wilson, a friend of ours, told me that Macho Man Randy Savage, one of the things, in addition to being one of the greatest ever to wrestle, also like to provide young up and comers like yourself and others some unsolicited tax advice. Can you tell me a little bit about that story?
I didn't know if he's being funny or not. And I'm in the locker room just getting dressed beside Randy, and he looks over at me, and I'm a young kid, and I'm amazed I'm even in the locker room with him. And he looks over and goes, "Hey, kid." Yes. He goes, "Are you investing your money?" And I'm thinking to myself, I'm making Slim Jim, if that's what you're asking, Randy. He goes, and then he just immediately goes into, "Always invest in T-bonds. The government's never going out of business." And to this day, I'm going, okay, was the Macho Man giving me fine? Should I take it? I saw him do that. And then I saw an instance one time we had this young guy that was a huge Randy Savage fan, huge Randy Savage. And he comes to a show and he can't believe that he's on the same wrestling show as Randy's, and he's in backstage, and he walks up to him, and he can't be more starstruck than he is. He's going, "Mister, I can't tell you what an honor it is to be on the same show with you, Mr. Savage. I grew up watching you, Mr. Savage. You're like my favorite wrestler for 30 years, Mr. Savage, and you're just," he goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hey, kid, the first name's Macho, the last name's Man. Read the boots." And so, because he had Macho Man on his wrestling boots, funny. Randy was a character in and out of the ring, and
Oh, yeah.
Dusty was too, for that matter. I'll tell you brought up Dusty Rhodes. I'll tell you a quick road story because this ties into our previous conversation about how important it is to really figure out who you are and what kind of character you're going to try to portray when you go out there. And I can remember in the early 2000s, I did an event with the Dusty Rhodes with Dream, and and I just randomly, I think Ric Flair had come out with a book. I said, "Hey, Dust, are you gonna read are you gonna read Ric Flair's book that he just came out with? He's got a lot of stories in there." Back goes, "Nah, man, book." He said, "I'm about to come out with my own book, and I'm gonna tell all the truth." And I go, "Oh, yeah." He goes, "Yeah, for instance," he goes, "let me tell you about Ric Flair. Let me tell you about Ric Flair." And back in the day, when wrestling was still territories, Minneapolis was a big territory in Minnesota with the Gagnes and the AWA, and that's where Ric Flair kind of started. And I don't know if you've ever seen old pictures of Ric Flair before he became the Nature Boy Ric Flair, back an offensive lineman. He had a shaved head. He looked like Uncle Fester. He was just yoked up. He was thick and had not quite become the Nature Boy that we know today. And if you were the traveling champion at the time, and you go to different toys, well, the young guy would be told by the promoter they need to pick you up at the airport. They need to drive you around and make sure you got food and make sure you get to your hotel and just kind of be there for whatever your needs are. And the low guy on the totem pole would get that job. And so Doug was telling me this story about how when he was like 19 years old, he was coming out of Florida and he was the champion down there. and he became the NWA champion at a pretty age. Dusty did. He was a big star early on, and he got sent up there to Minnesota, and he's traveling, and Ric Flair's the one picking him up from the airport and driving him around. Again, this is pre Nature Boy, the whole deal, and he's riding with Dusty, and hey, Big Dust. I'm thinking about quitting my job. And I think at the time, told he was like an order in a hospital or something at the time. Flair was. He goes, I'm thinking of quitting my job and seeing if I could do this full time. But I know I need a gimmick. I need a character in order to be successful at that. Yeah, baby, that'd be a good idea. You do need to have a character. You do need to have a. I'm gonna tell you what I'm thinking, and I want your blessing on this. He goes, I think I'm gonna grow my hair out a little bit, get a perm, dye it blonde, and I want to be rambling Ricky Rhodes' cousin. And Dusty said he looked at me and went, "Nah, baby, I don't think that's a very good idea." To this, if Dusty had blessed that, we'd
Listen, Ric Flair lives in Tampa, and he frequents one of my buddy's
yeah.
restaurants all the time downtown, and he's always in there. If I see him, I'm going to ask him that story. When you're having the success in the WCW, coming from where you came from, growing up poor in Alabama, the family life that you mentioned, what are your brothers and sisters thinking about when their older brother, younger brother is doing this thing that a lot of kids just looked at as like, you might as well be an astronaut if you're being a wrestling superstar. That's where I rank wrestlers when I was a kid. I think astronauts were about 2 notches below wrestlers in my own mind. So I imagine it was the same thing for you coming up from Alabama because watching those shows as kids, like, because one, they were not easy to get on TV. You had to be in the right place at the right time, especially where you lived. I grew up living in the country, and we didn't have cable when the internet first started. Where I grew up, it was a long distance phone call with the modems and all that kind of stuff. So in order to watch a wrestling show, it was a special thing. So what was that like?
My siblings were really, really good about it, and what I mean by being good about it was big on doing their own thing at the time too, and being very independent. And but they did a wonderful job of being proud of my success while not treating me like I was a superstar or allowing me to get raising in a lot what we say here in Alabama, and really keeping myself grounded and keeping myself humble. And my older brother, we would go out to eat with our families. Well, at least once a week and just enjoy some time together and try to spend as much good. My younger brother was busy golf with his Navy career, so we didn't get to talk that much. Extremely close, and I would write old school letters back then too, like pre-email. But we stayed pretty close, but they did a great job of keeping me grounded while still being extremely proud of what I did. The ones that probably were the most starstruck and got the most out of it were probably my younger sisters because they were in high school at the time, so I'll hear stories now. Now, they never shared this with me at the time, but I'll have their old friends from high school that will know me just because they went to high school with my younger sisters, and it was such a big deal to everybody, I guess, at that time in high school, and it was a big buzz for them and everything else. But I also, while saying that too, Will, I was very much so young, as I mentioned before, in hyper of the fact that want to ever act like I didn't belong there, and I didn't want to ever be unprofessional about it. So I was really big on carrying myself in a very professional way and not acting like a superstar and not bringing, an entourage to every pay-per-view that I did or something like that to try to impress them. Was very business minded when I did it, which looking back, I may have overcompensated in that regard, being afraid that people would think that I take it seriously or treated it like a party. I probably didn't share it with my family as much as I wish that I had shared some of those experiences with my family. Like, I think I was right to travel by myself and show and be very workmanlike and being professional about it. But at the time, my first pay-per-view, man, was the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. And I wrestled Disco Inferno for the cruiserweight. That would have been nice to take family to and let them just kind of experience that with. And so some of that stuff I wish I had done, probably similar to, I don't know, a professional football player getting to play in a championship game or the Super Bowl and making sure that their family has tickets. I think my wife saw me wrestle live twice when I wrestled during that time. My brothers maybe once or twice.
Yeah, and I know wrestling, it can be very hard on the families because you guys are on the road so many days out of the year, hundreds of days out of the year, and you don't get to have that time back. And while you're on the road, you're trying to stay in shape, you're trying to get ready for the next event, you're doing all those things, you're trying to balance your life. So that's difficult for a lot of guys when they're on the road. Let me ask you this. When you wrestled the Disco Inferno for the championship, how did that match go?
Storyline of that match was you had the Disco Inferno that was just a cruiserweight. There wasn't anything more dramatic going on than just here's this young up and comer, Lash LeRoux, that's going to take on the Disco Inferno and try to get his shot at the cruiserweight title. And at that point, I was not polished enough that they were going to put the title on me. So wasn't expecting necessarily to win, but I was trying to make it as entertaining as possible. And so when you're the low man on the totem pole, you're sort of coming up with your own issues as you go. And the things that are most memorable out of that match, one is in the build-up, I had some interviews for Saturday Night to go on our Saturday night show. And so did the old locker room interview cliche with Mean Gene Okerlund. So I'll always be able to say, I had the old Mean Gene Okerlund interview there, and I coined a phrase that I used, and I tried to carry this on through to the pay-per-view to make it a little bit more entertaining and interesting for the fans. When they're interviewing me, I go, and Disco Inferno, when I get you to Las Vegas, I'm gonna throw a little gree left shoulder, a little gree over my right shoulder, get my mojo working, and laissez le bon temps rouler, let the good times roll. So I'd always refer to Las Vegas as Lash Vegas. And the day of the show, I had a T-shirt specially made for the pay-per-view that said "Viva Lash Vegas" on it that I wore to the ring. And then putting the match together with Disco, I wanted it to be a little bit more high stakes and be a big deal review. And you're going to try some stuff you hadn't done before and really push the envelope. And I wanted to do this move that I've seen a lot, Rey Mysterio do a lot, where he jumped off the top rope. It's Rana, but you jump off the top rope, land on the guy's shoulders, and swing through, and the guy falls forward, and you've kind of given him like a flying head scissors almost, for lack of a better way of putting it. And so I go to do this to Disco, and Disco doesn't really know how to take it, and I don't really give it. And what it turns into on the live pay-per-view, and you can watch this match even now, I jump off the top rope. He sort of catches me on my shoulders, but immediately dumps me on my head. And so that really rattled my cage, and I had first concussion that match because of that.
And you talk about, they weren't ready to put the belt on you. And when you get a belt in the WCW or WWE, whatever it is, that's the organization saying this guy can carry this belt and sell fights and pack the crowd. And that's basically like they say to Spider-Man, with great power comes great
That's
responsibility.
right, that's right, and what winds up happening, and many wrestlers don't get credit for it. Back then, we did a lot of non-televised shows, and if a show was non-televised, there was this old cliche in wrestling, if it didn't happen on TV, it didn't happen, right? And so, that they gave me a couple of opportunities there where I won the cruiserweight title house shows, these non-televised shows, against Rey Mysterio, and I would carry that belt for a couple of shows and then to him on a non-televised so that by the time we're on TV again, he's the cruiserweight champion again. But yeah, you're right. They want to make sure that you can sell that thing. Now, sometimes it's used to elevate the wrestler, and sometimes the wrestlers used to elevate that belt. But it's always got to be something that's going to come together and do good business for them. And Chavo, that's one of the things I always took pride in. Chavo Guerrero Jr. and I, when Fits in Action gimmick towards the end of WCW, and they put us together as a team, and there's more of us in little mini faction, we were expected to just be comic relief for WCW. They didn't have anything else for us, but they thought we were all talented enough that we didn't need to be sent home. They wanted utilized on TV, so they just threw us all together with a pseudo military gimmick and just basically said, we're going to turn you loose and just be entertaining. And we did such a good job of getting the fans' reaction with that gimmick that they actually put the tag team titles on me and Chavo together doing that. So we became tag team champions, and then make them your own in order to make them successful, right? And this is in any kind of genre that you're involved in. And for us, literally what they came to us is they gave us the pitch that I just shared with you. They said, we want you to be comic relief for the show. Go home and watch the movie Stripes with Bill Murray. You guys are basically just going to be jokes. And by the way, urban camouflage was pretty big at the time in the late. I want you to know these colorful camouflage clothes, right? So they sent production guys to the local army surplus store, and they came back with just bags full of camouflage for us to wear. And me going, okay, rather than all of us looking alike and just looking like a buffy soldiers, I walked up to him and I go, well, if you're going to call me Corporal Cajun, does it matter how it's camouflage as long as I'm wearing the camouflage? And they went, no, no, as long as all of you guys are wearing camouflage. I go, well, I'm going to make it my own then. Get to the wardrobe department. I took them a pair of yellow pants that were the yellow camouflage and then a pair of the red camouflage camo urban pants. And I said, split these middle and take one color and sew them to the other. And now I'm going to be like court gesture almost. I'm going to have two different colored legs on my camouflage pants. And then I added to that, I took my wrestling boots that, people have seen wrestling boots before. They're kind of high up your calf. They're little boots. Well, I only laced them halfway up and I folded the top halves down over the top of the boots so they'd look like World War II jump boots. Now I've tried to add to the military gimmick that way as well. And then they had these bucket hats for us. And the bucket hats, like Desert Storm style, I cut a hole in the top of it, and pulled my hair through to be goofy. And I put my sunglasses on with it, and with my dog tags around my neck, I wore my Mardi Gras beads still. And so that's a way that you can say, okay, they're going to try to put something on me, but I'm going to in a way that makes it my own and still makes it unique and makes it flashy and gets the fans' attention.
Have a vivid memory of exactly what you just described right now, of seeing you in that exact outfit. I hadn't called upon it in my subconscious for some time, but as you were describing that, I vividly, I can see that in my mind's eye right now, from, probably 20 years ago or so, or even more. And you mentioned, around the time the WWE bought the WCW.
Oh, no, no. Well, WCW, became defunct basically at that point when WWE bought out. And so when they bought us out, there was a guy there in WCW, the talent liaison, which is basically vice president of talent relations. That means he's the go-between the office and the executives and the wrestlers themselves, almost like a GM for a professional team, right? And so, his name was Johnny Ace. And Johnny Ace got hired pretty quickly by WWE to wrangle all these WCW wrestlers that they were used to. And so Johnny had this really raspy voice, and I got along with him pretty well. And he called me at home and he goes, "Hey, Lash." I said, "Yes, sir, Johnny." He goes, "I got good news and I got bad news." Okay, I'm a best first kind of guy, Johnny. What's the bad news? Bad news is Vince is only interested in 24 guys, W. And I said, "Okay." So from the roster, they're only gonna hire 24 guys initially. Okay, what's the good news? Well, the good news is you're one of them. Okay, great, Johnny. What am I gonna be doing? What do I need to do next? Don't do anything tight. They're gonna absorb your WW contract. And I thought, okay, well, all this is great. This is good. And then for, about the next 4 weeks, while they were trying to work things out organizational standpoint, I was getting a paycheck from WCW and from WWE. They were just doubling my paycheck. I was getting and so I just started squirreling that money for a while. And then after about 4 weeks, my contract was gonna roll over to my final year with WW, before I would have had to negotiate a new contract. And that's when they called me up a week roll over. And, right, and I'm one of them, and at that point, he told me just to kinda sit tight, they'd get back with me and let me know where we're gonna go from there, and I waited. About 4 weeks later, my contract is about to roll over to the last year of my WCW year, and then they call me back up again, and they go, "Okay, Lash, Vince wants you to sign a WWE contract," and for you to understand sort of the significance of that and what the difference is, at WCW at the time, if you signed a contract with them, you got pretty much a set salary for the year, and the only thing additional you got on top of that guaranteed money was merchandise for T-shirts, video games, action figures, things like that. Well, in WWE, this would give you a much lower downside, meaning you didn't have as much guaranteed money, but you made residuals off of all the TV shows you did and all the pay-per-views. So at the end of the year, if you're being used for all those different shows, you're gonna make 3 times as much. There's no ceiling to how much money you can make. Of course, Johnny calls me up and he goes, "Look, Vince wants you to take a pay cut and sign a new W contract, but here's the thing, you are a workhorse for us in WCW. In WCW, you're on every show. If you're willing to work that hard for us in WWE, you're gonna make more money in the long run anyway." And my reaction to that was, look, I'm not greedy. If I'm paying my bills and just living my dream, what do I care? It's not that big of a deal to me. Sure, send me a new contract. I'll sign a new contract. So I took a $100,000 pay cut to go up there to WWE. And about right after I signed that new contract, they literally called me the next week and they said, "Look, we have a training school. We have one in Cincinnati and one in Louisville. And you can drive between the two of those things. And Vince wants you to go up there and he wants you to help train guys up there for about 4 weeks till they're ready to bring you out on television again." And the good news is, man, he loves the Raging Cajun character. He likes what you're doing, but we want you to go up there, knock the ring rust off, make sure you're still in ring shape and everything else. Well, man, I got up there in 4 weeks, Will turned into like 9 or 10 months that I'm stuck up there. And The bad thing about that is they didn't tell me that going in. So if they're living in a hotel and living out of a hotel with 4 other wrestlers in one room at a time, trying to save as much money as we can with the travel, you only get the bottom line of the money that you are offered because none of this stuff you're doing is considered WWE shows, even though you're on the road as much as you would be if you were on TV. And the only day we got off really was Friday. So I would train guys Monday through Thursday. Friday would roll around, I'd throw all of my gear in the back of my truck and all of my laundry, and right after I finished training guys on Thursday about noon, I would drive the 8.5 hours home just so I could have one day home with my wife and spend Friday with her. Then Saturday morning, I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and drive 8 hours back to Cincinnati so I could be there to do a show that night that's a local show for these trainees that I'm not getting paid to be a part of. And I just got tired of all of that, and I felt like it wasn't really what I had signed up for. And the guys that were training at the time that's coming through there, that training class was Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton, John Cena, and Dave Batista. So I'm looking at the landscape and I'm going, I'm not happy. They're not happy. I'm not making them money. I'm getting pretty burned out up here. And meanwhile, my mother-in-law also was going through a terminal illness, and I felt like I needed to be at home with them. And I just hit a wall. And at that point, I took a buyout on my contract, came home, and I went on and did some stuff in Germany for a while. I did some stuff in Australia, but it essentially came to a point to where in wrestling, it's all about timing, and you're also going to get plenty of injuries too. And when the timing starts falling away and the opportunities start falling away and the injuries start becoming magnified, then you start recognizing maybe it's time to hang up the boots. And I didn't know what was going to be next at that point, but I knew I needed to start transitioning more over into something more wrestling related. And more opportunities started opening up in ministry and in my caricature work. And so I really started concentrating on building up my caricature business at that point.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit about how you got into the caricature industry. That's a very interesting and isolated industry. I think you're the first caricature artist I've ever spoken to. So tell me how you got there. Obviously, you have some artistic talent, but tell me the origin story of that.
And so the origin story of that is I've always loved to draw from the time I was a little kid, and that's not unusual or unique to me. In fact, I always say I've never met a little kid that doesn't enjoy drawing. Some just keep drawing, and some find other things they're passionate about and pursue that instead. For me, it was always drawing, and especially with young boys, you'll see them grab comic books, and they may trace like some superheroes from a comic book, or then maybe they get to where they want to look at the comic book and then draw it, and then they'll get to where they can freehand it, and then you really feel like you've accomplished something. And I had a lot of group of friends that were like that. But for me, even at a young age, I realized I liked facial expressions and I liked drawing faces and those features. And if I drew Batman or if I drew Superman, as cool as a character as he was, he had a square head and not a lot of detail. So that didn't impress me much from a face standpoint. And then I discovered Mad Magazine. And Mad Magazine, again, if you were a child of the 80s, this was a humor magazine mixed with a comic book that would make fun of movies and TV shows. And you would open it up and it would be like, okay, this month we're going to roast Top Gun, the movie. And you flip it up and you go, well, there's Tom Cruise. You don't have to tell me it's Tom Cruise. That's a cartoon that looks just like Tom Cruise. And that blew my mind. So I taught myself how to draw caricatures before I even knew what a caricature was, just because I was interested in Mad Magazine. So by the time I started wrestling, I was really good at caricaturing celebrities and things like that. And as we talked about before, we were on the road 300 days out of the year, different town every night. And you'd have to be at these arenas at noon to be ready to do a show that doesn't go live on television until 7 p.m. So I got bored and I noticed every locker room had a whiteboard in it. I bought a pack of dry erase markers and I began drawing Hogan and Flair and the guys in the back while we waited on the show to start. And they would laugh and think it's hilarious. And the editors and publishers of the wrestling magazines that were there covering the show saw me drawing and asked me if I would do cartoons for the magazines. So I started doing a wrestling cartoon feature for WCW magazine called Lashing Out, where I would just spoof something about one of the wrestlers once a month or whatever. And at that point, man, I was not a professional artist. And I was smart enough to realize, even at that young of an age, they're not hiring me because I'm a professional cartoonist. They're hiring me because I'm the wrestler that can kind of sort of draw. They don't have another one of those. And they don't have another artist that can kind of sort of wrestle. So if I'm learning on the job, they're probably not going to complain about that. They're going to be happy with whatever I give them. So I treated it like it was a real responsibility and a real job. And every month that I had a deadline, I tried to get a little better, a little better. I literally went from, the very first cartoon I did was a cartoon of Goldberg. I had drawn it on typing paper, inked it, colored it with colored pencils and markers by hand, and handed them a hard copy, to then 13 years later, when I kinda walked away from all that and stopped doing cartoons for the wrestling magazines, I was doing everything digitally and emailing in my work. I had just evolved and taught myself as it went. And I started pulling away from wrestling during that time that we talked about. Now it seems like a lot of people have podcasts and are very interested in that platform and that genre. Back then, the big new thing was blogs. Everybody had a blog and everybody was blogging. And I noticed a lot of artists that I admired, and even some artists from Mad Magazine had blogs. So I started a blog just to be able to follow their blogs and try to learn from them. And I learned a lot during that time, but I would also post some of my work, and I met these other caricature artists through that. And I've never been shy. I'd send them an email and I would go, "Hey man, I really like how you drew this celebrity, and why'd you draw the nose from this angle or that big? Maybe you could give me some helpful criticism. And oh, by the way, here's a caricature I drew of Will Smith. What do you think?" And they would look at it and they'd email me back and they'd go, "Wait a second, is this Lash LeRoux the wrestler?" And I'd go, "Yeah." And so then they want to ask me about wrestling. And I was like, "Yeah, you be happy. Feel free to ask me anything about wrestling. I'm happy to answer it as long as I can ask you about caricature." And that's when I learned there's actually like a caricature union called ISCA. And I became a member of that. Somebody sponsored me to become a member of that. And then I found out that this thing with live events is a big deal among caricature artists and that's a thing. And I was approached by a guy that owns a company out of Maryland that's called About Faces Entertainment, and they provide caricature artists for live events all over the United States. And they said, "Have you ever done live events before?" I'm going, "No, I didn't know that was a thing." And they're like, "We think you'd be uniquely qualified for it because, again, with caricature, you find out, man, you may find people that are great artists, but they're not able to draw fast enough to draw a lot of guests in a short amount of time. Or you find people that are great artists, but are not very professional, and they may show up 20 minutes late for a wedding and they're wearing t-shirts and a blue jean. Well, that's not going to work. Or you find people that are very professional, very dependable, show up an hour early, have all the right things in place and everything else, and they're kind of mediocre artists, and they also are not very engaging with your guests, and so it's awkward for everybody that's being drawn. It's just a quiet artist in the corner. I found out pretty quickly, Will, I could show up an hour early, look professional. It was a bonus if people found out that I was a wrestler, and that was a big deal too. And then I drew pretty well, and I'm pretty happy with that, and I worked on that, and I worked on speed, and now I've become a relatively fast caricature artist, good caricature artist, and I'm telling stories like we're talking the entire time. So I became very entertaining and engaging with their guests when it comes to parties. And once the word kind of got out on that, whether they're wrestling fans or not, I'm the guy they want for their parties.
So when you're talking about live events, people could hire you to come to a birthday party, a wedding, a bar mitzvah, anything like that?
Absolutely. So there's 2 facets to my live events. There's digital work and then there's traditional work. More often than not, I'm doing traditional work, although I'm doing more and more digital work. But traditional work is similar to what you might have seen in the past at Six Flags or at Disney or someplace like that, or a theme park or a festival, where a guy just has a marker and a piece of paper, and really quickly he's doing an exaggerated, funny portrait of you. I could do one of those in about 3 minutes. It would take me 3 minutes to draw you a piece of paper like that. Then I slide it in a nice plastic sleeve as a presentation, show it to them, hand it to them, and everybody's oohing and on and laughing. And most of the time, there's a line the entire time. Matter of fact, the most challenging thing is to cut the line off when my time is up. But I do college campuses, I do weddings, I do bar mitzvahs, I do corporate events, corporate picnics, anywhere and everywhere that there is a group for a party or an event, it works, and it works really, really good. And sometimes it may be in somebody's private residence where they're just having a graduation party with 100 people there, or sometimes it may be a Christmas party for a corporate event and I'm going to their offices. Or I've even had situations where like Microsoft will call me and I'll drive over to Atlanta and I'll set up in their break room and they're just having employee appreciation. And so during the 2-hour block, they'll send an employee in there during their lunch break to get a caricature really quick. They get to take home with them. And when I'm doing live events like that, I can pre-print the paper so that it has a corporate logo on it or the event branding or anything else on it that they want. And I also do a digital version, which is the exact same concept, but when I'm drawing on an iPad, and that iPad's plugged into a flat screen TV. People can watch me draw live on the flat screen TV, and then we print it out 4 by 6 in full color with the brandings, logos on it, and everything else as a lanyard that you wear around your neck that looks sort of like a backstage pass. And I do that for a lot of trade shows and a lot of conventions and a lot of conferences. So I make some really good money off of companies that want to book me out to do a 3-day convention or a 3-day trade show where they're competing with a lot of other industry leaders and everyone has a booth and you're trying to draw as much attention to your booth as you can. Well, they have found out really quick that people love my stories, they love my caricatures. So instead of just giving out a pair of socks and hoping somebody sticks around long enough to give them a sales pitch, if you sit down in my chair and I'm drawing you, and when I'm doing the color digital caricatures, it takes me about 8 minutes or 10 minutes to do that. Well, they've got all that time of a captive audience to sell them on whatever they want to sell them on. And even if they're not going to sell them on that or that's not a good client, then I'm entertaining them with my stories, and they've got something memorable to carry along with them. And I do probably 16 conferences or trade shows a year just doing that. So it's a wonderful, beautiful, lucrative thing for me to do. There's an industry standard across the board on what it costs, and I just keep it right in line with that and do very well for myself.
That's so funny that you mentioned, someone giving out socks at convention because I have a pair of socks that I got at a convention. I saw them in my sock drawer this morning. I was getting dressed. I never wear, it's one of those things like, yeah, I'll pick up a pair of socks. Why not? Or whatever. But, as far as like getting someone to stick around, one table's handing out socks and the other table's got Lash LeRoux telling wrestling stories and doing live action caricature drawings. I'm going to stick around that booth probably all weekend just for the stories, to watch the art and maybe even learn about the business. Maybe not, but I'm definitely sticking around and talk to you.
Well,
Do you have a particular person that you've caricatured that you're most proud of, or what's the white whale? Maybe say it a different way. If you could caricature one person live, someone sit for you and to draw them, who would that person be?
probably Donald Trump. That'd be fun to do live. If I was at a live event and the president was sitting down and I could talk to him while I'm drawing him, that's a lot of fun. And not long ago, I had a great situation like that where I was able to draw Kid Rock live. And I knew Kid Rock from the WCW days because he used to come to the shows all the time with Joe C. Joe C was a big wrestling fan back then in the day. But I do some stuff for the University of Alabama, do a lot of events for them. And generally about once a year, they'll have me in what they call the Founders Lounge at the University of Alabama in the stadium there. And I'm drawing there. And those are all the biggest boosters and sponsors there are. And Kid Rock was at the LSU game. I think it was last year. And so I drew him when we were there too and kinda gave it to him. And that was fun and that was cool. Typically, when people ask me what my favorite caricature is that I've drawn, it's always the next one, man, because the challenge for me is I'm always trying to improve and I'm always trying to get better. And it's really helped me philosophically from an artistic standpoint to do live caricature because I can never take these things with me if I'm doing those black and white ones, right? It's an in the moment experience, and I'm handing it to that person and I'm moving on. And the next one I draw, I'm hoping is gonna be better than that one.
Is there a particular body part that's more difficult to draw? I've always heard that fingers are difficult to draw or eyeballs or something like that. Is there one particular part of the human face that's more difficult than others?
Hands can be difficult, and I've gotten better at that, and I think I'm abnormally good at that. I'm uniquely good at drawing hands, so I'm pretty proud of how they turn out for me. What I struggle with, and I'm always looking for a different way to do it, is noses. Noses can be so challenging, and it's because the angle dictates what the nose winds up looking like, and it's so dimensional, depending on whether somebody it's easy to draw a nose that looks flat if they turn sideways and you're just doing it straight out. But if somebody's looking at you straight on and you've got to try to get some perspective going there, that could be difficult.
And let me ask you this. Obviously, the traditional boardwalk caricature artists that everybody knows, that's usually the familiarity. And it's usually they're lampooning the person that's sitting in front of them, right? So if a guy sits down with a big nose, that artist is going to hammer his big nose and make it even bigger for the drawing. But obviously, if you're at a birthday party, a corporate event, or something like that, you got to be a little bit more delicate in your presentation with your art. You don't want to exploit somebody or make one of your customers feel bad. But that's the traditional caricature. We're going to make your eyes bigger. We're going to make your ears bigger. We're going to over accentuate everything. So, how do you strike that balance between the traditional caricature drawing and striking that balance of being gentle to your clientele.
Right. What you're saying, Will, is absolutely 100% true, but I've got a different philosophy than most caricature artists do. And in the same way that I mentioned a second ago, that one of the most challenging things is cutting my line at the end of the night and going, I'm sorry, somebody's always got to be the last one, and my time is up, and I've got to move on. That's always difficult because people really, really want a caricature. Flip side of that is also true. I'll show up oftentimes, and if it's the first time I'm ever at an event, or if they're just not familiar with caricature, it's sometimes hard to break that seal and get the first person to sit down. And so I make the joke now. I'll tell them, I go, don't worry, I'm not the TikTok guy. I'm not going to roast you because we've all seen those videos online where they're just roasting them and they flip around the drawing and the person's laughing, but they look like they're laughing on the outside and cringing on the inside because they don't quite understand why they've been insulted this way. And they're afraid if they don't laugh, then they look like they're not in on the joke. And I don't think that that's ever fair to the guest. My philosophy always is I'm not drawing this for myself. I'm drawing this for you so that you can have a good drawing and souvenir and also have a great, unique experience sitting down, hopefully, with me that's memorable as well. And so I believe wholeheartedly that you don't have to roast people to exaggerate. I always say you can exaggerate in a flattering way. And so I take great pride in the fact, and I've had many people tell me this, that most everyone will laugh and they'll look at it and go, wow, that looks better than I look, or I'll make a joke because I will exaggerate and I'll go for broke, but it's never at the expense of that person. It's usually to enhance them and flatter them. And there's a couple of things that you can never go wrong with, like I'll even make the joke I'm drawing ladies and I'll go really crazy. I'm doing the eyelashes. I'm going, so far, I've never had a female going, wow, you made my eyelashes way too long. No, they love that. They love that.
They they pay good money for that at, some
Yeah,
places.
that's exactly right. Or I'll tease them and I'm going for broke on their hair and I'm going, "You look like you spent a lot of time on your hair, so I should too,"
Yeah.
and draw that. You get away with a little bit more with guys sometimes because guys are trying to look a little bit more rugged and not quite so feminine, so it works a little bit better with caricature sometimes, but I think I've gotten mine distilled down to a style that does not look way over the top, and it's very flattering.
Do you have, like, that joke you just made about the hair, just kinda like icebreaker kinda conversations as you're drawing the people, kind of getting them laughing and getting them engaged? Do you have some stock material that you rely upon? Obviously, you
Oh,
plan it, but you have some tricks in your back pocket to bring
oh
them out when needed.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I've made the joke that I've got a good 15-minute set, that's polished and ready to go. Throwing back to your old comic days, right? You've got that set that you've got ready to go, whether it's the 5-minute set, the 10-minute set, or 15-minute set. No, I'll have people that will sit down and you right out the gate, you always ask them to, you go, hey, you ever been drawn before? And oftentimes they'll say no. And you'll go, great, then I can make you a promise. I'll stop and I'll look at them. I'll go, here's my promise. This will absolutely be the best caricature you've ever had drawn. I'm glad you never had one drawn because now I've got nothing to compete with, right?
Yeah, the bar's super low. Yeah, you got the 5-minute set, the 10-minute set, and then you have the emergency set, break glass in case, things are going really off the rails.
Yeah, but it's unique because, the great thing about it, the great dynamic is, Will, is sometimes people will sit down and it'll be nothing but a constant banter back and forth of just cutting up and making jokes. Sometimes people will sit down and it'll get really serious really quick, and you don't even know how you got to that point, but you're really having a philosophical conversation on life. Sometimes you connect with people, and then sometimes people just sit down and they're super quiet and they just wanna be drawn, and in 3 minutes, they've got a drawing and they've moved on.
That's awesome. And, in addition to your WCW background and your caricature work, you're also an associate pastor at a Baptist church. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what your faith means to you?
Well, my faith means so much to me because, like we talked about in the beginning of our conversation, who I am is so strongly dictated because of my relationship with God and my perspective on who I am in the eyes of God. And I believe we all have value because of that, because we're made in the imago Dei, that's the image of God. And because of that, that means that if I truly believe that God created all this in the first place, then I have everything just as open to me as anybody else does. Maybe I'm at a disadvantage in some places that I am in others, especially when I was growing up, but the opportunity was still there. And I trusted God to be who God said that He was. And so I've always looked at Him as God the Father, God the one guiding me. And that faith has always meant so much to me. And then I had the people that's around me that God uniquely placed there to mentor me and bring me forward and given me the story that we've shared here in this time together. And I carried that forward in such a way. When I started wrestling, people would hear my story and then they'd hear that I'm a believer and that I'm a Christian. And I'd get a lot of invitations and people interested in me talking to their groups, whether it's a church group, whether it's a youth group, whether it's a social club over here. And they want to hear that story and they want to hear that story of redemption and faith and how much God played a part in all of that for me. And I appreciated that and I was grateful for it. And I recognized if we're talking about this from a church perspective, churches refer to this is your personal testimony and your relationship with God. And we all have a different story. You mentioned that earlier, and I'm a firm believer in that. We all have a story. So I would show up and I go, okay, I get it. My story is a little bit more dramatic than most because I came from nothing and I came from this poverty and I came from houses where we didn't even have running water or electricity to then I went and was on television. And thank you that you care about that and that that's important. Don't misunderstand me. But I also, the more I shared that story and I stopped and listened to other people share their stories, I realized everybody's got a story.
Absolutely, and if you were the pastor of my local church when I was growing up, I would've been in the pews every Sunday because the way you speak and the way you present your story is very intriguing and engaging, and so I've really appreciated, you sharing all this with me, and, a couple more questions, and I'll get you out of here, and I appreciate all this time. What habit has made you successful?
Being disciplined, and that sounds vague. Yeah, I meant for it to be vague because discipline is different depending on what your priorities are at that time, right? But in order to be successful at anything, that work ethic and discipline, I think, go hand in hand. And by discipline, what I mean is you find that thing that you're prioritizing right now at this season in your life, and you make sure that you're hitting that mark on a daily basis. A quick part of my story that we didn't get into, and I won't drag it out, but when I left WWE and I kind of didn't know what was going to be next, I'm trying to build a floundering caricature business because that didn't happen for me overnight. And then you have all these injuries from wrestling. And then when you're a young man, it's easy for you to be bitter if things don't end the way that you choose for them to end, which is what happened in my wrestling career. And then you kind of don't know what's next. And I had all these injuries and I had all these excuses. Dude, I had a compression fracture in my lower back, two herniated discs, a ruptured disc. I was burned out on working out because I played high school sports. So I went through my 30s kind of with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, just being honest about it and not even realizing it, and having a little bit of a depression for what had been taken away from me and not even realizing it. You and I've had a previous conversation where we talked about there's so many jobs that become your identity. They're not just, employment and they're not just a vocation, but if you are a special forces soldier, that's not a job, that's your identity. If you're a doctor, that's not a job, that's your identity. If you're a professional athlete, that's not a job, that's your identity. And so for me, my identity for so long had been Lash LeRoux, the wrestler, and feeling like that was taken away from me and not knowing what's next. I spiraled without even realizing I had spiraled until I woke up when I turned 40, about 2016. I turned 40 and I looked in the mirror. I weighed 318 pounds and had a 46-inch waist. And I was taking pain medication to cover up my injuries and I didn't know what's going to be next in life. And I looked in the mirror and I said, this is not sustainable. I don't know what's next, but this is not sustainable. And I need to reorient things and get things back in order, bring that discipline back into my life so that I can be successful again at whatever it is that I'm going to have the opportunity to be successful at. And then for me, I had this epiphany that my life is sort of a three-legged stool. I've got my physical health, I've got my spiritual health, if you want to call that your mental health, depending on where you're coming from a believer standpoint. And then you've got your professional health. Right. And all those things feed into each other. If I look good and I feel good, then I'm going to perform better at whatever my job is. And if I'm performing pretty well at my job and I'm making some wins there, but maybe I'm not watching my diet as much as I could, those successes bleed over into the other issues. And so all those things I think feed off of one another. And I try to be disciplined in those three facets of my life, whether it means I need to get up this morning and make sure I make all the connect calls that I need to make before I go on the road and do that next event, or if it's hitting the gym every day, even though I'm not training for the next WrestleMania, or if it's making sure that my prayer life is where it needs to be and my Bible study is where it needs to be, so that when I have the opportunity to sit down and have spiritual conversations with somebody, I can speak from a position of authority.
All right, that's fantastic, and thanks for sharing all that. To close out, I'm just gonna go through a couple of quick, questions. I'm gonna call them the speed round or, lightning round, whatever you wanna call them, but it's gonna be basically 2 words and or something like that, and you can just say you can pick one or you can expound on it. You'll figure it out as we go along. It's pretty easy, okay?
Sure.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs, and
Uh,
dogs because dogs work and cats just lay around.
alright. I agree with that. The moon landing, yes or no?
No.
Aliens,
No.
alright. If you could fly, time travel, or be invisible, which one would you pick and why?
Time travel in a heartbeat. Time travel. I've always been fascinated with time travel. Why on that is I think that there's so many different things that have happened historically speaking. I'd like to see them for myself.
Absolutely. What's your favorite food?
Steak, ribeye
Alright.
steak to be specific.
Yeah, me too. Does ketchup belong on a hot dog?
100%. Ketchup, no mustard.
I've asked a lot of people this, and I think it's a regional, position because I used to live in
Absolutely.
Chicago, and I've said this before, I had a buddy up there, and if he caught you putting ketchup on a hot dog, the friendship was gonna be over. He couldn't look you in the eye and respect you as a man if you put ketchup on a hot dog. What's your favorite sport?
Football. Football. I think
Alright. College football or NFL football?
college football. No question. Roll Tide.
Alright. Roll damn tide. What's your favorite hobby?
Working out. Yeah. The
Okay.
weight training.
Is rollerblading cool?
No, no. Rollerblading had its season about the mid-90s. That was it.
Yeah, that's
If you
right.
still have those rollerblades from your mid-90s, get rid of them.
What is your favorite book, movie, song, and sequel?
Okay, I won't take the easy way out, by saying the Bible because that's a throwaway for anybody that's a believer. So I'll say my favorite book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Alright.
What was the second one?
Movie, which they made that into a movie, so if you wanna double up, feel free.
No, I'm not gonna double up that because I did not like the movie near as well as I liked the book. Imma say my favorite movie was Rocky. It's
Which
close, but
Rocky?
Imma say Rocky. Oh, Rocky 1. I'm gonna say Rocky 1 as the original. No, you know what? If you're gonna let me do Imma play it this way, Rocky 4.
Okay, yeah, no,
Rocky 4 taught me everything I needed to know about the Cold War.
exactly. Rocky 4 is a standout. I only count the 5 Rockies in the original, whatever they made after that,
Absolutely.
do not count to me. I was just talking with a
Yep.
buddy of mine, last week, and he was claiming Rocky 5, and I would order them this way, and agree with me if you'd like to. I would say Rocky 4, Rocky 2, Rocky 5, Rocky 3. I think Rocky 3 is at the bottom, even though Hulk Hogan, one of your, contemporary wrestlers, was in that movie as Thunderlips. It was the most cartoonish of all the Rockies. That was the one where I believe you had
Yeah,
the
that's fair.
robot butler. Mr. T was in there. It was a big crossover movie kind of thing. That's what it felt like to me. But Rocky Four, as one of my friends who passed away last year, what Brian Wilson's good friend, Brian was actually in the band with him, Skylar. He said one time, and it made me laugh. Drago was doing all the scientific stuff, and they were shooting him up with everything, and all Rocky used was the mountain. He
Absolutely
just
does.
used hardcore nature to train.
Best training montage ever, and Rocky IV soundtrack was my high school years in athletics. I was listening to all that was my pump hype music constantly. Rocky IV by far the best one, and for my money, Rocky V was the worst.
Yeah, it kinda went off the rails. They tried to go back to the beginning, kinda like Rocky 2. He got soft, had to go back to the beginning. Rocky 3 got soft, had to go back to the beginning, and then they went way back to the beginning in Rocky 5. I think they should probably stop at Rocky 4. What is your favorite sequel?
Godfather Part 2.
That's a
So
good one.
that yeah, that was what was close to me on that is I go, okay, if I say Rocky IV, does that count as a sequel? Rocky IV, I like the Rocky movies and I like the Godfather movies very much.
Yeah, I think sequels are more just ones that are even though Godfather has a 3rd one, that's easily cast off to the side as a
Yep,
mistake in cinematic history,
right.
but I'm thinking of things that are 1 and 2. An exception to these is Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, skip Temple of Doom, even though I like it in its own special way, and then The Last Crusade I thought was a fabulous movie because it kinda went back to what they did in the first one, which is generally what the 3rd one does, it goes back and tracks the first one. The 2nd movie, the sequel is generally a departure from the first, except in The Godfather, it was true to form, and actually, if you've read the book, The Godfather, which is outstanding, they do it in
Yes,
time chronology order where part 2 is actually the beginning of the book, and then it moves forward into part 1 and kind of follows it through a chronological timeline, and it flushes out more of the characters, Luca Brasi and, Johnny Fontaine, and gives you a little bit more history about what's going on there, 'cause those characters are kinda glossed over in the film, but they're actually very cool characters and have more dynamic roles in the book.
yeah, absolutely. In fact, I almost chose it as my book for the very reason you're saying, and I don't know if you're an audiobook guy as well, but there's an audiobook version of The Godfather where Joe Mantegna does a narration on it that's phenomenal.
Right, and Joe Mantegna, of course, he's in, part 3 is, Joey Sasso, right?
Joey yeah, Joey Sazo, that's it.
That's
That's
right, and,
right.
yep, and then what about song?
Ooh, man, that always changes for me. Music is ever evolving for me depending on when you catch me. I'll hit you with one of the ones I have rediscovered and have been listening to lately now is I rediscovered Neil Diamond. I was never a Neil Diamond fan until recently, and I said, I'll throw that out there right now as my most recent top song, but I'm a huge Elvis fan and even the genre of music. Like at any given time, I might be listening to Neil Diamond, John Denver, George Jones, Waylon Jennings, Elvis Presley, Poison, Metallica, Ozzy Osbourne, or Eminem. And all that stuff is constantly on my playlist. And I'm one of those kind of people that music for me is very much dependent on what vibe I'm in at the time.
Absolutely. Where can people learn more about the work that you do?
I will direct you towards my website, lashcandraw.com, and also at lashcandraw on Twitter if you are, or I guess it's X now, if you are a user of that. But outside of that, man, I don't do a lot of social media. So that's probably where the best place you can see my work is. And if you want to just, if you're curious about my wrestling career and you're not familiar with it, a quick Google of Lash LeRoux will pop up all that stuff. Same thing with searching on YouTube. There are still plenty of matches on YouTube. And for those out there that have the old WWE network, all of my matches are up on the WWE network.
Awesome. And one last question. Give me one person you think I should interview next.
Ooh, Conrad Thompson.
Who's that?
Conrad Thompson would be a guy that we call him the Podfather, and he was doing podcasting before everybody else jumped on to podcasting. And what makes Conrad Thompson a very unique character is not just because he does such a wonderful job in that genre now, but he was a wrestling fan that got to know Ric Flair really well, and through Ric Flair met Ric Flair's oldest daughter, and he's married to Ric Flair's oldest daughter, and he's a mortgage broker in Huntsville, Alabama, that started a platform that now has Eric Bischoff has a podcast with him, Jeff Jarrett has a podcast with him, Kurt Angle had a podcast with him at one point, Mick Foley, Arn Anderson, myself. He had this whole collaboration and network of podcasts. Matt Hardy, who else does he have podcasts with? Bruce Pritchard, and Bruce Pritchard was the right-hand man of Vince McMahon for years and still works in an executive role up in WWE as one of the most creative guys they got up there. Road Dogg Jesse James was a podcast guy. So this guy has facilitated all of these different shows across these platforms for now, I think it's probably safe for me to say 15 years.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks for that tip. I'll certainly try to connect with him. And Lash, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. Thanks for coming on Pod Number and giving me all this time. I hope you had a good time, and I'd love to talk to you again.
I had a blast, Willis, and it's my pleasure. I promise you, man. It's been an honor, and I appreciate everybody still caring enough that they're interested in all these things that we spoke about.
Absolutely, sir. All right. I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.